Hey guys, welcome back to the Loser Report, where we cover topics ranging in film, literature, and of course video games, or whatever else crazy stuff we want to cover. And today we are covering franchises. I'm your host, Tommy Tom, and with me today from episode 0, my talking partner, Mr. Anthony Smith.
I'm Ant, Mr. Chit Chat. I'm gonna talk at you for a little bit.
All right. And joining us today, my fellow writer of the show, he is, of course, fluffy, he is fun, he is Mr. Benjamin Burson.
Greetings and salutations. How are we all doing today?
All right. And, of course, he is the man behind the scenes. He's the guy that will be editing this podcast. So if it sucks, send all your hate tweets towards him. He is, well, Ben's baby brother, Mr. Bart Burson.
Hey, how y'all doing out there?
All right. Hey, guys, as I said in the beginning intro, we are talking about franchises. Which ones are good, which ones are bad, which ones are close and dear to our hearts. We've each chosen a couple, but before we get into that, we have to address the elephant in the room, and that is the big franchises, the big blockbusters. And of course, I'm talking about Star Wars, and of course, some of our comic book ones, specifically Batman and Spider-Man, because these are the ones that are doing spin-offs. So, first off, I gotta go to Ben first, because, little known fact, Ben is the person that has, Ben's whole family pretty much introduced me to Star Wars, because every time my mom used to babysit them, it was Star Wars. Every time. And all I really wanted to watch was Captain Bucky O'Hare. So, Ben, tell us a little about Star Wars, your, feelings on it, and growing up in, just growing up with Star Wars.
Well, growing up in a Star Wars household, you always had the TV versions recorded on the VHS tape, and you eventually would wear those out fast-forwarding through the commercials, because by the time you actually got around to watching it, whatever products they were selling were either discontinued or just the commercials weren't there anymore, so I'd always fast-forward through those, and we would watch Empire, primarily, out of the first original trilogy there, pretty much every weekend when you would come over and we'd have to be watched by your mom or you'd be watched by our parents.
Yeah, that is not an exaggeration. It was Empire. I probably have that movie memorized per point. And how was Star Wars in your household? Was it a big deal or was it not?
For me as a kid, it was a big deal. For the rest of my family, not as much. It was always Empire Strikes Back. That was the one movie that I saw a million times out of the Star Wars franchise. Until I was an adult, I did not remember the first or the third movie. There was only the sweet, creamy middle of Empire Strikes Back. And honestly, in my opinion, which is the correct opinion, the best movie out of that trilogy.
Now, Bart, I'm going to come at you, and I know what... You must know what I'm going to ask, because I know somebody here was a huge Darth Vader fan. Huge Darth Vader fan.
I don't know about that. I mean...
Halloween, pretty much anytime you're just alone by yourself in your room, just with that Darth Vader mask and all that.
Well, we had this great desk chair and just, live around,
It was like the swivel chair in his hyperbolic chamber there that he took his helmet off. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
You'd be sitting in the room with the helmet half assembled on your head, and then come in and you'd spin around and put the top part of the helmet on.
Only thing I needed then was one of those lightsabers, kids who were growing up during the new trilogy.
You'd figure that in the 90s they could have figured out that you could put consensually smaller pieces of pipe together so you could have an extendable lightsaber. But they didn't invent that until the early 21st century. That makes no sense. You got really missed out on some good toys there growing up.
But, alright. Now, speaking of Star Wars as a franchise, we are talking about the original trilogy. We can't forget about the prequels.
Yes, we can. Yes, we absolutely can.
Totally can.
Yeah, there's this thing called drinking, Tom. You could totally forget about anything you want.
What prequels? I I only know about a sequel and a side story that is obviously somebody's Star Wars based D&D game. Actually, Warhammer 40k.
Yeah.
Don't you want to say fan fiction?
Yeah, fan fiction. Yeah,
No, that's someone's D&D game. You have a blind monk, a machine gunner, an assassin droid, and your protagonist.
Oh, that's true, huh? Yeah. Yeah. She'd be like a cleric, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, rogue.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess they would be rogues, huh? Rogues and bards. Or
No,
just
she
rogues?
was the one rogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one.
But hey, I mean, all right. Granted,
That makes the pilot guy a ranger.
prequels were pretty bad, but it did give us, some good things out of it. I think Clone Wars was a pretty good animated series. Anybody care to?
I'll weigh in on that and say, yeah, Clone Wars was actually pretty good.
The first animated movie that was done by Tarvarsky, the guy who did Samurai Jack.
Dexter's Lab.
Dexter's Lab. Yeah, that first movie was not as good as the 3D animated series that came out later. That went to a lot more of a dark, realistic, gritty place later on in the series, because they would have 8 seasons, something like that. Something like that, and yeah, it got very gritty and dark, and you got a little bit of more of a taste of the gravity of the actual war itself. And also, the Clone Wars gave us Battlefront 2, which was on the PlayStation 2, the greatest game, the greatest Star Wars shooter of its era, and still blows the brand new Battlefront that's been out for a year now completely out of the water.
I'm glad you corrected yourself there, because I wouldn't. If you say the greatest Star Wars game, it's like there's some heavy hitters right there. Because I mean, you have the Rogue Leader games, because like that series is, I mean, they got to bring it back. Like, it was really good. Shadows of the Empire. Shadows of the Empire was great for its time.
For its time, but that game got so crazy once you learned to open up the debug mode and mess with all the settings in the game. It was an impossibly difficult to enter sequence on the Nintendo 64 controller, where you had to hold down like every single button, and then with your chin you could move the center joystick. It was like left, down, up, left, down, and you would eventually open the debug mode, and you could activate change the amount of gravity, change the color of the fog. You could equip all the weapons. You could raise and lower enemy health, and it really, I mean, of course, it broke the game, but it also opened up my mind to playing modded versions of games that traditionally would not have been modded.
Yeah, I remember. One thing I remember about that game, it's the battle sequence with the chicken walker in the first level.
Oh, that was so scary. That was like impossible. You came across the that first ATST, and you're out of your mind with fear, and then all of a sudden you realize that if you stand directly underneath it, as long as you don't get stepped on, you're invulnerable.
Pretty much, yeah. But I mean, you think about it like at the time, for like, that was kind of new for video games to do, like, for like 3D games anyway. Those big enemies to fight against.
Absolutely.
But I have to interject here. The best Star Wars games were the Dark Forces series.
I don't know if I ever played
Especially when
Dark
it branched
Forces.
into Jedi Knight, and those games were great because you had your shooter, which was like, it was a solid shooter. Like, it was essentially Doom, but with a Star Wars reskin. But then you had your Jedi power fantasy on top of that. When you hit the midway point through the game, you get all your Jedi powers, and then you can just mess with the guys.
Yeah, I never played those games, so I can't attest to that. Growing up, it was always Shadows of the Empire, Rogue Squadron. There were the Return of the Jedi and Empire game that was on the Super Nintendo. There was Knights of the Old Republic, which you played a little bit of. I think you played through the whole thing, right? No, you never did?
I actually never played Knights of the Old Republic. One game I played a lot was it was a computer game. It was called TIE Fighter.
Oh,
And
back in the '90s. That's old school.
that game was really good though.
It
and
was,
You're,
it
you're
was.
playing from the perspective of the Empire, and I liked that. That blew my mind.
Well, there was TIE Fighter and there was X-Wing. I remember in the '90s playing it on an Apple II computer with a throttle and a yoke set up for a flight simulator, and you'd come around and just fly along the side of a Star Destroyer, and right in the little crevice there'd be just TIE Fighters lined up, and you were in the X-Wing, and you'd have to stay on the track and shoot them.
All right. Those are video games, but moving forward, now we have the new trilogy, I guess, coming, and now they're actually doing spin-off movies, if you want to call them spin-offs. I mean, Rogue One really was kind of like the intro into the New Hope. What were your guys' thoughts on, I guess, The Force Awakens and Rogue One? And what are your hopes for Last Jedi?
If I can start first, that's okay with everybody. Force Awakens felt a lot like A New Hope.
I disagree. The Force Awakens felt like getting a cotton candy enema. It's all fluffy and sweet and in the wrong places.
Okay, all right.
Just stuffed in the wrong places.
But as for Rogue One, as something that we all know how the story is going to end, but as a movie itself, it got from point A to point B. It's good. It's real good, actually. I like it better.
Rogue One was, in my opinion as well, better than The Force Awakens.
I have to, go with Bart's sentiments about The Force Awakens. It did feel like A New Hope, but at a bigger scale. Just with, the Star Destroyer and the Death Star. Kind of the same thing, just, bigger scale. But it was also, I think, a good means to get people back into the franchise that maybe for younger generations. Because, for something, you gotta remember, while I believe pretty much all of us, our first taste of Star Wars was the original trilogy. A lot of others, their first taste was, the prequels.
What?
And,
what are you talking about? There are no prequels.
And,
prequels?
this is like a new beginning for other people that are getting into the Star Wars fandom. Rogue One, I can't really speak on, mainly because I'm going to be honest, I fell asleep, but that's not my fault. I did that was the third movie in a trilogy of watching, which actually ties into our next topic, because we're going to move on from Star Wars, because one of the movies that I saw was Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, talking about the comic book franchises, Spider-Man and Sony are kind of creating their own little franchise. And admittedly, I believe Spider-Man had some pretty good games. Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite Spider-Man games, just because it switched between yourself and Venom. But I guess I want to get your thoughts on a Spider-Man spin-off where there's possibly not going to be a Spider-Man.
So that was there. You're referring to the Tom Hardy Venom movie that's coming out.
There is the Venom movie. There is going to be a movie called Silver and Black with both Black Cat and Silver Sable. And there is talks of them doing a Kraven spin-off and a Mysterio spin-off. And this is all,
The Mysterio spin-off sounds like one of Marvel's traditional tactics to just throw something out there they have no intentions of actually following through on, just so they can misdirect the media into looking elsewhere while they work on the real goal.
Hence the name Mysterio. His whole ability, his whole thing.
His whole thing is about misdirection and illusion. So
but the thing is, this isn't Marvel. This is Sony, because while Marvel has, Spider-Man can appear in the Marvel movies, you have to remember Sony's in charge of Marvel. They still own the rights to Spider-Man. So they're making their own kind of Spider-Verse, but there's no guarantee that there could be Tom Holland Spider-Man in there. Now, my suggestion is that they use this as an opportunity to maybe introduce a Miles Morales Spider-Man.
That wouldn't be the end of the world. And in creating the Spider-Verse, just the nature of the story itself is multiverse theory, which fits in with Marvel's MCU, with Doctor Strange and introducing the multiverse. And it fits in with there being multiple Spider-Men on different lines, different movies that could all have existed at the same time. I mean, in the comic Edge of Spider-Verse, there are versions of Spider-Man where Peter Parker is an actor who portrays the Spider-Man on television. You know, so it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a schism between Marvel and Sony as far as these movies concerned. They could all roll together if they do a multiverse themed.
I want to get Ann and Bart's point, but I will add, for this Spider-Man deal, at least with the Tom Holland, it is a 6-movie deal. And the last movie that he will be a part of, I believe, is a Homecoming sequel that is to follow and be the intro after Avengers 4. So we get Infinity Gauntlet, whatever sequel they're going to call after that. Then you get the Spider-Man, and then Sony and Marvel have to do a new deal. But, Ant, what are your thoughts on a, I guess, Spider-Verse without a Spider-Man?
You know, I think if they actually do draw from the comics here and play the whole actual Spider-Verse angle where you have the different Spider-Man, you have the Peter Parker that Uncle Ben was never shot and he was successful, so he's like basically if Spider-Man and Iron Man were the same guy. You have the version of Spider-Man, the Scarlet Spider. You have the Doppelganger, which is like the failed like Peter Parker clone. You know, stuff like that. That would be
Ben
cool.
Reilly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the Doppelganger was Peter Parker.
Right,
Ben Reilly was the Scarlet Spider.
Right.
Because he assumed that.
But Ben Reilly is
a clone.
also a clone of Peter Parker.
I think actually in the comic they don't know who's who.
Yeah, I think there's confusion over who the actual clone is.
It's Ben Reilly.
Well, no, Doppelganger's the one that breaks down, though. So it could be either one.
I'm telling you, it's Ben Reilly.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, they could go that route. But I think with some of the stuff they're announcing, they're literally just throwing spaghetti at a wall.
Yeah, and see what sticks. Yeah.
Yes, that's where I was going.
Yeah, I throwing spaghetti at a wall is a much less vulgar term than what I would have used.
Well, Venom, they know that's going to be good. Like, they know that's going to make money at least. Not necessarily be good, but it's going to make money.
Well, I mean, again, Tom Hardy, he's...
That could go either way, because remember Bane.
Yeah.
Remember the Bane emote.
I will get you, Spider-Man.
Yeah.
A man's life is his life, Batman.
But he's also going to be a much more convincing Eddie Brock than Topher Grace ever could be. Period.
That's not saying much, but I mean,
well,
it's not saying a lot.
He literally just has to play Mad Max, but in all black.
Yeah, well,
like it's
more
kind
dialogue,
of the same character,
and yeah, not really. He doesn't have the Australian accent.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't make a character.
Right,
a character is not an
differences
accent.
between Eddie Brock and Mad Max. Max, I guess, allegedly was in the original story a police officer before the bombs fell and he became a wasteland savage. Eddie Brock was a photographer, but he was not as good as Peter Parker, so his work kind of didn't get his photos weren't bought.
Is that really fair to say? I mean, if you really think about it, Peter just posed for all his shots.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Peter Parker had the edge there, being also Spider-Man.
I call hacks.
You guys are forgetting one of the main points about Eddie Brock is that he was also a serial killer as the Sun Eater. He made up his own person. That's how he was doing pretty much the same thing Peter was doing, except he created a murderer. as opposed to a superhero.
I really hope that's the route they go with that story, because that would be way better than what they're probably going to do.
Also, with him eating people as Venom, that'd be nice.
I don't think Brock I know the Matt Gargan, who we actually get in Spider-Man: Homecoming. That Venom was the one that ate people, figuratively
And that was before Cassidy became
no
Carnage, right? Before Venom shed the symbiote, whatever it was.
No, that was after. But that is the thing. The rumors are that Carnage will be the antagonist in the Venom film, but not necessarily the villain. There might be another villain that they might have as the main villain in there. And there has been speculation that it could be maybe the Chameleon.
I highly doubt they would. I mean, the Chameleon would be a great choice, but if you're going to do a Venom film, from the perspective of Venom, he's a hero, like a wielder of justice, just as the Punisher is a wielder of justice. Not necessarily, he doesn't necessarily justify the means, but he achieves an end, and perhaps from his perspective, they would spin it to make Stark and Spider-Man look like the villains, whereas Venom then is the anti-hero.
It's not hard to make Tony Stark look like a villain.
I know, just give him a bottle of scotch and let him loose.
But on a different note, I'm more interested to hear more news about the Black Cat, because I actually like Felicia Hardy as a character and her character arc throughout the Spider-Verse.
She's got a lot of character. Some plot points, too.
No, because she's...
Check out those plot points. And that's... those are some pointy claws. They're just... it must be cold in here. Those claws are out.
No, because she has love interests, like, in the story that isn't Spider-Man, so it'd be interesting to see,
Yeah, herself.
Well,
doesn't she end up with Morbius at one point?
Yes, she does.
That's actually a more interesting dynamic than with Spider-Man.
it is. Now, the reason I feel like they're doing that is that they might be trying to do what DC's doing, which brings us over to the Batman. Batman has its own kind of cinematic universe, I guess you could say, of its own. While they may say it's the DCEU, Suicide Squad, they took a lot of liberties, I guess, in changing a lot of the squad and making it really Batman villains, minus Captain Boomerang and Mr. Fire Guy and Dancing Weird Enchantress.
Terrible.
But, there's been talk of them doing Gotham City Sirens with Harley Quinn, Catwoman, and Poison Ivy. Josh Whedon is set to direct a Batgirl film. And they also want to do a Joker Harley Quinn movie. I think the title going around is called Mad Love. That's what they want to do with that.
Oh.
And on top of that, they also want to make maybe 3 different Jokers. Who knows? They're gonna do a Joker origin movie produced by Scorsese. Rumors right now is that they are heavily trying to get DiCaprio to play the Joker in that one, and it is not going to be tied into the DCEU. It seems like DC is really banking on Batman, which, I don't know, might be a fault, being that the best movie that they've put out so far is Wonder Woman.
I agree to that. Wonder Woman was an excellent film, but I think DC is grasping at straws here. I think they are trying to cash in on this sensationalism of having a strong female lead, which is what they would do a Gotham Sirens movie about. But the characters that they are portraying, these women, may be written up and storyboarded as being strong female leads, but then the movie comes out and it's just crap. There's no other way of describing it other than just sensationalized, misogynistic crap.
Crap with tits.
It's crap. Not even great tits. Not even like awesome tits. It's like where is the tits? They're not even there. It's just poor planning, bad scripting, skimpy outfits and crap. It's just crap. It's just I can't get behind DC anymore. I can't trust them. It's like having someone who's like an acquaintance and they've fallen hard times, and so you let them move in. Then you come home one day and your VCR and your TV and your toaster is gone.
Also, you let Bryce on your couch.
Also, I let and then and I think he molested my cat. I'm not sure, man.
Well, all right. Here's what I'll say. My main issue with any of the DC movies, and I actually had a discussion with this at work the other day, was maybe the action sequences. They're too 300. If you want to, Zack Snyder-y.
That's true, but it works for Wonder Woman. For like some of the other stuff, not so much.
I don't know. That third act kind of took me out of it a little with the spoiler, the fight with Ares. Like, I guess the big difference with, say, Marvel, and we're going to see in Infinity War because you know that's going to be heavily CG, because Thanos is going to be heavily CG, but for the most part, other than the Avenger movies, most of their fights are kind of practical. The backgrounds, maybe the most green screen was probably Thor, with the fight with Loki in the first one, and then maybe towards the end of the second one. Those have been the most kind of CG thing where you can actually see them. But for the most part, you can see the characters, and it seems like they're in an actual place instead of standing in front of a green screen. Like, and I'm just basing that off of the Justice League trailer, where it's clear that, you know, Aquaman isn't riding on the Batmobile, and he's not jumping through the building. Like, awesome scenes, but at the same time, not as practical as, I say, the other ones, and that's my fear for a lot of these spin-offs of how they might do that.
Yeah, if you want to look at like good CGI work, the opening Deadpool, which is just layers of work there, like that's mostly CGI, you know. And
Well, that's I think the primary difference between Fox doing movies and Marvel doing movies, and
and then you look at how
and then Warner Brothers is their talent isn't as excited about the roles as they're trying to make them seem like they are. You know what I mean? Like, they spend more money booking their actors than they do putting into production.
But
and it shows, and it looks terrible.
You want to know what looks really terrible is the CGI they use in Transformers. That's just a mesh of metal in your face. You don't know what the hell's going on.
No, we're not using the T word. We're not using the T word. That I don't want to even acknowledge that franchise. But you know what, guys? We've gone into some of the big franchises here. I think it's time we get into the heart of things. Get into heart. So, first up, we're going to have Benjamin talk about one of his most beloved franchises. I don't know what it could be. It's a mystery. Maybe it might be a spy. I'm not sure. Ben, tell us a little about your franchise of choice. Franchise.
So today I decided to do a little research into and talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, which would be James Bond. Now, James Bond is, based on the Ian Fleming novels, which were originally published back in '53. And they were so popular, when the first couple novels dropped, within a year he had a deal for a TV show. So this is, in 1953, to go from a short pulp novel to a television show within a year is Game of Thrones style or Harry Potter style hype that they got right off the bat. Bam, there you go. So when asked to pick one for the franchise show, I would pick something that's iconic like James Bond, because this isn't just a franchise that spanned 27 movies, 15 novels, half a dozen video games.
Now, this is where I just want to quick interject, because you actually revealed this to me, because the latest one that is supposed to come out, the working thing is Bond 25, because they identify 25 movies. Now, you're saying there's 27. Just explain that maybe to some of the audience listening as to what you mean by 27 movies.
Okay, so since Dr. No premiered back in, I think it was like in the 60s, something like 1964, something like that. That's the first James Bond major motion picture with the Scotsman himself, Sean Connery. So since then, there have been 25 movies that are considered mainstream canon. And that includes everyone from Sean Connery through George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig. Now, along those lines, there were two other movies made. One was a satire, the original Casino Royale, which was done in, I believe, 1967. And it was done as a spoof off the novel Casino Royale, which was then revisited with Daniel Craig's character and given the more serious tone that the novel originally had. In the 67 film, it starred Woody Allen. Like, it was hilarious. It was a great romp, and at the end of the movie, it was much like a Mel Brooks film where everybody broke the fourth wall and things just got crazy. But I still count that as a legitimate Bond movie because it's about James Bond. And his spawn, his children, actually are involved in the movie, and his family. And then, in the Sean Connery series, there was a James Bond movie called Thunderball, which came out in the 70s. Then the 70s. And then in 83, after Roger Moore had taken over the role and had done, almost a dozen movies, they tempted Sean Connery to come back and do a remake of Thunderball called Never Say Never Again, which was Sean Connery and I believe Kim Basinger. And it was a remake of that movie with much more lighter tone, more comically oriented. So that's where I get 27 instead of 25. There are 27 films.
Thank you for the clarification. Now, this is franchise that has spanned almost 70 years. You just said 59. That's when
53.
53.
53.
So yeah, it is past. It's it's 60.
Yeah.
60, about 65 almost years.
And you're talking about a franchise that inspired other franchises.
Like what franchises?
So, influences from James Bond inspired the entire spy thriller genre, and went on to support spy satires as well. So and even crime movies like all of Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock, Smoking Barrels, Smoking Aces, Snatch. Those are all take elements from Bond movies. Ocean's 11, not the one with Clooney because that was based on this movie, but the one from 1960, the original Ocean's 11, took elements from James Bond movies to sensationalize the coolness of high crime. That kind of cool, smooth, almost espionage style crime. So not only that, but you get Austin Powers, which is a clear satire of James Bond. You've got Johnny English, which was another satire. You've got The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was another Cold War spy movie, where the British spy and the American spy and the Russian spy all team up to stop a terrorist. And as it turns out, a lot of their mannerisms and the way they portray themselves were taken directly from influence from Ian Fleming's Bond. The list goes on and on. You got, and this is an honorable mention. You got I Spy, which was.
Is that with The Rock and?
No. This was.
No. You're talking about the. Okay.
Bill Cosby.
Yes.
This is one of his first TV roles. Was a syndicated television show called I Spy, where he played a spy, and it took a lot of its influence for how the stories were structured from James Bond movies. And on top of that, you get like Get Shorty or Be Cool. Those Guy Ritchie films.
Now, Ben, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to get to the important question. I'm going to throw this off to the rest of the panel. Do you believe James Bond to be the greatest movie, video game, TV spy that we have ever seen on screen or in literature.
As far as, you have to clarify that a little further. As far as like his abilities go, or his
I'm just saying we'll just say cult. Just notoriety.
Well, so now you're talking about spies. In my opinion, that makes James Bond the world's shittiest spy. Because he walks into a room, oh, Mr. Bond, everybody knows who he is. They recognize him as soon as he walks in. Oh, they have his drink waiting for him at the bar. Oh, martini, shaken, not stirred. Oh, here you go, Mr. Bond. Like, that's actually something that happens even in the first movie. That drink is introduced as a ploy for product placement. And James Bond movies are famous for product placement, especially liquor and tobacco. But he actually doesn't order the drink himself. It's only presumed in the first movie that he orders the dry martini, shaken, not stirred. It isn't until, like 4 movies later, it was, there we go, I got it right here. Yeah, so it's 1962 in Dr. No. He presumably orders it, but it isn't until 64 that in a movie he actually says to a bartender, I'd like a vodka martini. Dry, shaken, not stirred. He doesn't actually order. They just give him... And in most of the movies, when he goes to a bar, if you watch the movies, the barmaid or whoever he's with at the time comes up to him with the drink already made. Here you go. This is your famous drink. We know you're here. We know you're a spy. We know what weapon you're carrying. We know your whole deal. We know your wristwatch is also a laser. Here, have this martini that we know you want already.
We know your social, your bank account, and routing number. We know that, like, what brand of condoms you like, of course.
That would be none.
Yeah, none.
That would be the kind. Those are ultra thin. Yeah, they're super thin. You can't even tell they're on. Like nothing at all.
Well, if it's Connery, he likes sheepskin.
Naturally,
Scottish.
Yes, of course.
All right. Let me rephrase this then. All right. Is James Bond your favorite spy?
Absolutely, because of his flamboyant coolness and that his cool factor. Because nothing makes you more uncool than product placement, right? However, the product placement is so nonchalant and stuff, and he's so lackadaisical about it that he doesn't lose any coolness points for it.
What about you guys, Ann and Bard?
Okay, honestly, it's got to be a tie between the animated Inspector Gadget or Maxwell Smart from the original Get Smart series, and those were the two
Get
greatest
Smart,
spies.
also inspired by James Bond.
Exactly, but Maxwell Smart was a better spy. You know why? Because he was a bumbling idiot. Nobody...
You would expect it from him. You're right.
You wouldn't see him as a spy. Like, he was... It was just like, oh, what's this dumb guy doing? And
he's talking into a shoe phone. I mean, one can take you seriously when you're talking into a shoe.
You think he's a crazy person, and that makes him a way better spy.
That's true. You do think he's a crazy person. He's talking into a shoe, and he's obsessed with some lady named 99. Yeah, I get that.
Better spy. Or Inspector Gadget, but he's more of a Terminator than a spy.
He's also he's just an inspector, not an actual spy. I mean, then again, you could use him as I guess nowadays as a drone kind of thing.
The original Predator drone, Inspector Gadget.
Yeah.
Why do you think?
Go Gadget.
Why do you think he had his
Vision.
niece with him the whole time?
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. On that note, we're gonna move
Poor
on.
Penny.
We're going to move on from the spy, and we're going to go into one of my personal things. We're going to get out of the pedophilia thing and go right into some of my own personal childhood favorites. I'm talking about a franchise that is near and dear to my heart, Goosebumps.
R.L. Stein.
That's right.
Oh man, that show was when they transferred the book to the
show, the books, man. I forget that you're younger than us.
We had a whole collection of books. I know the books.
Even the books, like, were just as campy as the show, but that's what made them great.
Hey.
That was their charm.
Look, R.L. Stein was what a twist before M. Night Shyamalan was, because you knew at every end of every Goosebumps there was going to be some twist ending. It wasn't going to be all happy ending.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, there were, like, several books spin off from the Puppet one. I mean, that one was
that was
creepy.
creepy as fuck.
That was definitely the scariest one. That was Night of the Living Dummy, and there were 3 of those.
Yeah.
The only one that had more than 3 was actually Monster Blood, which he did 4, and was actually the last one that he did of the original, besides the spin-offs. But Goosebumps started back in 92 and went to 97, which makes me feel real old at this point, because that was 20 years ago that it ended.
Yeah.
20 years ago it
It
ended.
has been 20 years.
And it's estimated that it sold over 350 million worldwide in 32 languages. And
Bond beats that.
we're of course. Now, we may be all guys here and we're all familiar, but originally, did you know that Goosebumps was actually aimed for young girls?
This is something. Okay, this is great. Okay, so my introduction to R.L. Stein was actually not a Goosebumps book. It was a different short story that he had done called The Beast, about a haunted roller coaster. And throughout the whole book, there were these weird... Look, and granted, I was like 13 at the time, so there were all these very strange sexual overtones, right? Like it's about these 2 kids, this boy and a girl, and they're in their mid to late teens, and there's all this strange sexual tension going on the whole time. I think R.L. Stein is maybe not quite right.
Well, that's probably why they had Jack Black play him in the movie. But...
What, not Jared from Subway?
Oh, okay.
Hey, we've been full circle!
That's
And
worse.
here I thought we were getting away from that whole
But-
topic.
We're trying.
Yeah, but the first book that came out was Dead House, and as I said, the last one was Monster Blood. A month shortly after Dead House came out, it was averaging 1 million a month being sold. Then by the mid-90s, 4 million a month were being sold. And as early as 2008, it was still recording about 2 million being sold a month. So this is something that just keeps going. And it was pretty much a major thing that kept Scholastic above water. It was 15% of Scholastic's annual revenue was based on Goosebumps.
Yeah, it's huge.
And then when he stopped writing them, it dropped 40%.
And just to cut in here, with Scholastic, this actually ties into how I was introduced to it. The Scholastic book fairs at the schools.
Oh, they bring those shitty
And-
little carts with all the
Yeah,
books on them,
and-
and they open them up.
Ours was actually pretty big. Like they did
Yeah.
a pretty. They made a pretty big deal out of
Yeah.
it in the school I was
They
in.
made a big deal about it. But it was,
Well, it was actually a pretty big setup. Like it was an entire like library. It was pretty wild. But this is where I first was exposed to Goosebumps, and I bought a bunch of them just because I liked the cover art, and
the cover art was excellent.
It was-
and the raised cover, and
It was brand
and
new.
the
There
Goosebumps
was-
was raised and had little like wart bumps on it and stuff. Yeah, that was
it was
aesthetically
cool.
very
and then,
pleasing.
like the images that were on it, and I was probably only like between like 8 and 10, so there wasn't even that many of them out at that point, because that was probably around like 94, give or
Yeah,
take.
that was about the midway point. I mean, he was averaging a lot. But you bring a point, like, this thing hit. When it hit, it was running. And oddly enough, Bart brought up the TV show. What's her name? Margaret Loesch. She was the former CEO of Fox Kids. She offered Scholastic a TV deal for Goosebumps the day after buying her son, I believe it was Say Cheese and Die.
I remember that one.
Yeah, she bought him that, and based on his response to all that, just a day later, she offered them a TV deal, and that lasted from 1995 to 1998, 4 seasons, and was the #1 kids show for 3 years in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Do you remember the one? I think it was called "It Came from Beneath the Sink." It was about like a monster sponge slash teratoma
Oh,
thing that
yeah.
lived under the sink, and she kept having to feed it. That was like that was my favorite, and it sticks with me for a couple of reasons. First, because it was really creepy. Second of all, because when I was reading it one night, I had bunk beds with my older brother, and I was on the bunk bed, and I guess a spider had laid some eggs behind the bed, and one of them hatched while I was reading it, and all these little tiny baby spiders started crawling across the pages of the book as I was reading. Yeah, it was a little traumatizing. It was a little freaky. I didn't sleep well for like a week, but it was worth it because it stuck with me, and it's still with me.
So you still have some of those spiders? Is that what
Probably
you're
living in my brain, which would explain a whole lot.
saying? Nice.
Yeah.
I never. While I read them and I enjoyed the stories, I never found them scary personally. But as a kid, I ended up being exposed to like a lot of like adult horror movies. So I was somewhat desensitized to stuff that was aimed at children.
Yeah, I didn't find Goosebumps scary. I believe Bart brought it up, that puppet. That was the only one that was...
You know what? I don't find puppets that scary. Clowns, a little bit. Puppets, no.
It's one of those old wooden puppets. Those guys are freaking
No.
scary to look at.
They're
Whoa.
scary to look at, but they're fragile. Just kick the damn thing hard.
No, it's one of those things that, like... And see, Chucky was the only horror movie that ever freaked me out.
Yeah, I never really liked Chucky.
Dude, Chucky was the, like, I don't care about clowns, monsters, just give me a Jason, but just a little doll thing, because it's one of those things that it makes you question your sanity. Like, is that thing moving? Is it alive?
Well, sure,
not.
sure. I mean,
Honestly, what's scarier is it's not the monsters. It's not like the slasher fic. It's like when they do a horror movie where it's really just like a deranged person. That's scarier because that's real.
yeah, because that you could actually run into. in
Yeah,
the
that's
world.
terrifying. Like,
I mean, well, look, like
If we're going to talk about franchises and about crazy people, then maybe we should move on to like Saw. Then
no, I'm
No,
good.
No,
I'm
we're
good.
good. We're
Yeah,
good on
I'm
the
there.
Saw.
He's sleeping on the floor.
He's
He's there.
That's one that should have ended. I think we
Yeah,
all
I
agree
think
on that
I
one.
think we can agree on that
But
one.
I will say that the Goosebumps TV show, to me, and I don't know if Bart remembers this. I know probably Aunt and Ben will. That was, for me, a kind of replacement for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I hated Are You Afraid of the
Are
Dark?
You Afraid of the Dark wore it better.
It did.
Oh, it did.
Very-
Oh, it
did.
The
It
TV
did.
show. Oh, absolutely.
way more scarier.
Yeah, and the whole setting with the kids around the sacred campfire and the stone throne and telling the stories and
It made me wish I went to camp and I got to tell people terrible stories about terrible people doing terrible things
at
and
the
having
time,
terrible things happen to them.
it would have been great if Smokey the Bear would have just come out of the woods and killed all the kids around the fire. That would have made it for me because like at the time there were all those Smokey the Bear PSAs on TV and they were all about doing
That-
they were
Only
all about
you
doing
can
syndicated
prevent
television
fire.
crossovers and it would have been just great if Smokey just came out and only you can prevent fires. Let's put this fire out with your entrails and just rip the
That-
kids apart.
That is a whole different movie and or show.
I could get behind that.
It'd probably get traction these days.
It would get traction. I mean, if Sharknado could get traction, you could do a movie about a
Hey,
Smokey
hey,
the Bear.
Maybe Netflix
Shut your
would
mouth.
do it.
Sharknado is the greatest movie series.
You shut
of
your
all
mouth.
time.
Sharknado is terrible.
Well, let's shift from the bad franchises and let's get into something that I'm sure everybody loves and is dear to everybody's heart. That's right. Aunt, why don't you talk about your franchise that you wanted to talk about?
I'm going to talk about Lord of the Rings. Now, as a movie franchise, compared to some of the other ones we've talked about, it's kind of like still a budding franchise. Because compared to Bond, it doesn't have 20-some-odd movies under its belt. But the movies it does have under its belt, they're powerhouses. Like, they
are quality.
epic,
Serious quality.
high-quality movies of their time.
And
and-
Benedict Cumberbatch.
And the books kind of started... They weren't the first fantasy novel to come out, but they were the archetype for fantasy novels.
Absolutely.
They-
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's ripped off Tolkien.
All your fantasy novel tropes came out of these books. That was just an excuse for Tolkien to write about his made-up elfin language. He was a linguist. He wasn't even an author. But you know what? They're some of the highest-selling books ever because they've been around forever, and they're pretty popular.
Absolutely. And I mean, even he took influence from other fantasy books of the time that sort of hint at things that he extrapolated and things that he expanded upon. Like there was that short novel, Three Hearts, Three Lions, which was used as some of the influence for the basis of setting the rules for D&D, which takes most of its influence from Tolkien.
Yeah, D&D takes a lot of its influence from Tolkien. Even when you cross genres with the same sort of thing, Warhammer 40K, that's sci-fi, but it's basically Lord of the Rings in space.
Absolutely, Final Fantasy. Yeah.
Anything with swords and spells, it draws some inspiration from Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
And this, it wasn't even Lord of the Rings wasn't even where it started. It was The Hobbit. The Hobbit was the first thing he wrote, and that was in like the late 30s, actually. And Lord of the Rings was actually a spin-off, which didn't come for a couple decades later.
Do you think that it had to be 3 movies?
Not at all. Like they kind of padded out some things, but it could not have been contained in one, because the novel, while itself it was short, that's a lot of that's due to how Tolkien writes, and he doesn't really go into detail on the battles. All the battles are very much abridged in the books.
Yeah.
And like they'll only be like a couple pages for what is 20-30 minutes of movie. And it's the fact that it's two completely different mediums.
This is true, but I guess for the next my big question is, can you see them expanding this verse further? Like maybe go back to the original battle for the Ring of Power.
They could easily expand it. There are so many books in this series, and the timeline spans thousands of years. Like there is more lore in this than any of the franchises we covered by far. It makes other series that are actually loosely based on it, like Elder Scrolls, like it makes their lore look like it was not very well thought out, and there's not that much of it, just because by comparison there's so much. Like it makes the Star Wars extended universe actually look like there isn't that much content.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. Like Tolkien's Legendarium in general is as thick as The Hobbit, or more so. There's just so much time, because when the Lord of the Rings takes place, is a changing of an age. You know, it's the end of this age, the beginning of a new age.
Third Age.
Third Age, yeah.
Yeah, the amount of content that he has is outstanding.
And the time frames the ages cover, like the first age is the shortest, I believe. I could be incorrect in this, but it was like almost 600 years. And then the second age, I actually looked this up earlier. I'm pretty sure that was the longest, because that's almost 4,000 years. So just the time frame that these cover is crazy. And the characters themselves, like their lifespans, like you could actually go into the past of these characters and just do a movie that was, like 50 years prior or 100 years prior, and it's like you could still be talking about like Aragorn, because in the books he's like 190. He's like, because human lifespans are not what they are in our real world. They're
still shorter than elf lifespans, but way longer than ours.
Yeah, they're about triple what our lifespan is.
Now, all right, for fun here, if you could make either a new Lord of the Rings movie or book or anything, what would you call it?
Shadow of Mordor.
I was going to say it certainly wouldn't be Shadow of Mordor.
No, that would be hard to do, but Shadow of Mordor, the problem with that is, like, the story was actually pretty solid, but you're going from a game to a movie, which the problem with that is you're taking... When you go from a movie to a game, it works a little better because you're adding elements to it. Doing it in reverse, you're taking away elements. When you take away the interactive element, it kind of ruins it. But if they did make a movie, it would probably be called The Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm. Well, these are all like Homeric style names for the books, because the way that they're structured is almost like Homeric epic. You know, you get a character and you go through their lineage and who they really are, who their parents were, and everything, and then you introduce them and you put them in a battle, and then you kill them. And it's the same thing that George R. R. Martin is doing now with Game of Thrones. You know, let's give you a character, let's give you his whole lineage, let's give you a backstory, let's give some cool attributes, and let's make you fall in love with him. And now he's dead.
Yeah,
It's a very repeatable style.
William Shakespeare did it first, I think.
Well, Homer did it first.
Homer did it
but,
first.
But Shakespeare could follow suit, a couple thousand years later.
But on the whole, Lord of the Rings, like, what next book or movie they would do if they could do it and they did it right, I would think actually probably go back in the past and deal with the actual main antagonist of the entire series, which isn't Sauron, but Morgoth.
Yeah, or they could do. I would be thinking like they've got thousands of years of history and nobody's invented gunpowder yet. Why not do the Guns of Gondor, where they invent gunpowder and build cannons and guns and
fight Balrogs.
Fight Balrogs with fire sticks of their own.
Yeah, because according to Legendarium,
there's more than just the one.
Yeah.
Or they could go a little deeper on the Ishari, the wizards.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like they could actually do a story solely about them, because
I'd like one solely about the brown wizard.
Gandalf was the weird one.
Yeah, Gandalf was the
the
white
brown
sheep.
wizard was weird, but Gandalf was the weird one because he was doing what was taboo among them.
Yeah.
Like they weren't supposed to get involved. They were supposed to lightly guide events but not actually influence them. And
Yes.
and Saruman ended up, like, because of Gandalf's interference, that's actually what triggered everything, because Saruman wouldn't have been looking into what was going on if
So you're
Gandalf
saying
hadn't.
it's a Raiders of the Lost Ark clause. If Gandalf had just not gotten involved, none of it would have ever happened.
What I'm saying is,
like if India just stayed home, the same stuff would have happened. He would never have had to go back for the Ark.
No, if their council wasn't mostly inept between Elrond, the female elf whose name is like
Galadriel.
Yes, okay, Galadriel.
Galadriel.
I was like drawing a blank. Those two, Saruman and Gandalf, if their council wasn't mostly inept and honestly kind of dicks to Saruman, the whole trilogy would have never happened, because he would have never gotten involved with Sauron. Like, they would have just been like, oh, well, we'll do what this guy says because he's kind of making sense.
Yeah.
So Gandalf was the true villain.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Gandalf was the actual villain. Him, Elrond, and Galadriel, because they just had to be dicks. That's all it was.
We should send a letter to Stephen Colbert and see what he thinks about that. Since he's the world's leading scholar on Lord of the Rings.
He has a PhD in hobbitology.
He does, and I'm an actual hobbit. Like, this is tough. It's tough. It's tough, man.
Alright, guys, but we're going to move on now, continuing with our franchises in the second half of this. And we're going to start with Bart. Bart, you have a franchise that you've grown up with that you love. What franchise is that?
Oh, it's one that's it's been part of my life as long as I can remember. And that's the Legend of Zelda franchise. That's spanning, 31 years now, with 20 plus games have been released. Like 7 of them have been remakes of some older ones. What spurred me to talk about it now is that I just recently invested in a Switch and started playing the new one. And I've noticed a strange, it stands out against all the other games because of, because its gameplay. It's so vastly different. It's more akin to the very first one with the open world, but it feels like, it's got that, Skyrim open world feel, like anything could happen. It's fast. You gotta takes a while to get from point A to point B, even with a horse. You can climb up shit. You cook your own food. It just you're not dedicated to finding the story. You can play the game. The story takes a backseat for once, and you could really feel like a lot of different influences coming from all over.
I did appreciate that about Breath of the Wild, was the open world that it kind of allows you to pursue it in any order that you see fit. Whereas with a lot of other games that, if you try to do things out of sequence, you could just break the game and have to start all over from the beginning. Like with Ocarina of Time, if you tried to do the water dungeon before completing the fire dungeon.
Yeah.
Now, alright, I'm going to come clean here. I have never played any Zelda game in my life.
That's not true.
No, it's true.
That can't be true.
This is
Say it ain't so!
the only time I have played any Zelda character was in Super Smash Brothers. And I didn't even like using Link or Zelda, so I
No.
never really used them. So, I guess my question to you guys is, for any newcomers that would be coming into the game, what game would you suggest that they try out first, or would be a good jumping off point?
Either any one of the overhead looking down 3DS games or Breath of the Wild. I would not go for the older 3D games because
They were
honestly,
a bit clunky.
going back, they don't hold up. Like, they were great for their time, but
Yeah, I went back to try to play Majora's Mask recently.
games
and it
have,
was very difficult.
games did not have good cameras until very recently. That's a very recent thing.
Absolutely.
And I played, like, the remake of Ocarina of Time. It's really difficult to control because you can't see what you're doing.
Yeah.
But
it is. It's
Breath of the Wild is the way to go, and it does give nods to its old story, but it's very self-contained. It's not really a complaint, but my only real issue with it is once you get past like the main story, there is a lot of quests, but there's actually while there's a lot of exploring to be done, there's surprisingly less content than you would think, even though it's open world. But the thing is, they are adding to that.
Right.
Yeah, with
a suggestion that I would make to a starting off point would be to play the Game Boy, old school Game Boy game,
Link's
Awakening. Yes.
that is...
Link's Awakening would be a great place to start because it's an isolated story. It doesn't necessarily fall into the Zelda canon.
Actually, kind of does.
It
but...
kind of does, but I leave it open-ended, and all the elements of the Zelda game are there with none of the overarching story commitments. You're not
Yeah.
exactly trying to save Zelda, you're just trying to get back to where you came from. And it being on Game Boy, it may be less accessible for younger audiences these days because the old school Game Boy, it's just like trying to read a paperback book. The information is too slow.
Actually,
That's a societal thing. That's not even like I'm not even saying that as it's a slow moving game because it's a solid game. Just like the old Pokemons, we could still go back and play Red and Blue, and it still holds up as a solid RPG.
I still play Red and Blue. I still play.
yeah.
But, Bart, as somebody that hasn't played the games, there might be others out there. Give me like a brief, I guess, synopsis of the gist of a Zelda game, because generally, from what I've gathered, because I've seen you all play the games and all that, it's generally the same story that the main antagonist isn't Zelda. Zelda is the princess. The main antagonist is
the
this
protagonist.
Protagonist is this guy Link, and usually there's a villain. Most of the time it's
Ganon.
Ganon.
Yeah.
But give me a brief synopsis of what the main kind of story or development of a Zelda game usually entails.
Well, you pretty much just outlined it right there. I mean, you play as Link, and usually, you're just some kid. You're either with some family or living in the forest with a bunch of forest children, or and then the Call to Adventure happens. The princess. You either meet the princess, or she communes with you telepathically, or she's some childhood friend, or she's some sassy pirate that you run into. That you help out. By the way, that last one's my favorite version of her because she doesn't spend most of the game in the as a
prisoner.
as a prisoner. She's her own woman. But and then you have the villain Ganon or Ganondorf. Depending which game you're playing. Wants the power of the Triforce, And for some reason, Link and Zelda are the two who have
Yeah,
the other two
and
pieces.
he's constantly portrayed as the embodiment of some evil force, either as a man or as just, in this most recent iteration, a force of nature itself that just can't ever be completely destroyed, that needs to exist for balance to be in the universe, but you fight to contain or repel. So you don't actually destroy him, even in any iteration. You don't actually destroy him, because in...
Actually, technically, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, the man Ganondorf meets his end.
The man does, but the life force, the spirit that he was imbued with, goes back to the ether.
Ocarina of Time, you straight up stab him in the face.
Ocarina of Time, you straight up stab him in the face, but you
But
throw
he
him
gets-
through a time portal, so he doesn't actually go away.
He gets reincarnated though. Like, well, that was a retcon, but yeah, he gets reincarnated in every iteration. It's sort of like this like eternal dance between like these three forces, and they each represent something. So Ganondorf is literally like power, and it's like basically he represents power itself, and him being the villain, you know, there's that saying that power corrupts. Zelda is wisdom, so she's really just kind of guiding you along, and she's kind of like your brains, while you're just courage. You're this crazy kid that's like way outmatched. That's
Right, and I wouldn't even
Stepping
for half
into it.
the stuff that Link comes across in the playing of the game, I wouldn't call it courage. I would call it voracious foolhardiness.
Or having big balls, really.
Well, that actually translates as courage.
I don't think
know?
so.
I would call it more foolishness or lack of common sense.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
to interject here in Breath of the Wild. Link is not the main character. Like, he's the character you play as, but he's not the main character.
Right.
The main character actually is Zelda in that one. While you don't play as her, the story is very much about Zelda.
Yes.
Like, if you
yes,
do
for once it actually
the
revolves
side
around
stuff.
her.
Yeah.
And-
she is the central character. Everything revolves around her.
Her
She-
trials and
she-
tribulations to become...
she gets all the character development, and the fact that she represents wisdom, and it's an actual character arc to get where she needs to be. I don't want to spoil anything because it is still relatively new, but the fact that she has an actual character arc, which is kind of unheard of for these games, because usually they're just very cut and dry. They're not made to be complex, but this one is.
And they
actually
also don't
very
emphasize a strong female lead. You know, you got that a little bit in Ocarina of Time when she was playing the Sheik. She would show up as the ninja, but even then, she would really just show up, give you some information, then blind you and run away. Like, she didn't actually help you with any fights or anything. She wasn't a very strong female lead. She's still in hiding.
Kind of similar with Wind Waker when she was Tetra, but she at least, you know, got you to where you need to go. But what I find what I feel like when I'm playing Breath of the Wild, though, I feel a lot of Miyazaki inspired things, a lot of Castle in the Sky,
Oh, sure,
Princess
yeah.
Mononoke.
Sure. The way the palette, just the color palette in
Color
general,
palette.
how everything was so vibrant and everything was moving with the wind and
But Zelda's personality, her story arc is very similar to the strong female characters that Miyazaki often puts in his movies.
it's a building Dramon. It's a coming of age story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Building Stramon. Yeah, that's it.
yeah, it's very out of every game, it's pretty much what most fans were probably hoping for. Though some are still hoping on more of a futuristic setting where, you know, cars and motorcycles
Oh,
instead.
it'd be so cool if they did Link in a futuristic setting. and he
But
had a
like one of the
motorcycle.
biggest mistakes though, Nintendo, I think, what Eiji Numa and Shigeru Miyamoto did was create this timeline. Because the creators of Castlevania did the same thing a couple of years beforehand, before the
Right, to
Legends
get
of-
all the Belmont family tree string.
yeah, and that completely screws up their continuity. It makes it impossible for them to create a new game that fits well within their timeline.
So pretty much you're saying like it's best for them, like, you know, throw continuity out of there, just make the games and not worry about it.
Yeah, because like here's what they had to do with Breath of the Wild. They had to set it 10,000 years, then 100 years after, like, where the main story takes place is 100 years after, like, where, like, the events that leads to the point in the game happen. But this is all preordained 10,000 years earlier in the game's actual own history. So that's just like, some fuckery right there, just like, there's no point to that other than distancing itself from this continuity timeline that they created that's all messed up.
So they can create a new timeline from this point on.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the map too, there's a lot of references to every timeline mentioned.
Right, yeah, a lot of the areas on the map in the game
and the species
shared.
available.
There's Easter eggs or throwbacks
yeah.
to other areas from previous games.
Now the thing about these timelines is, one, they can be retconned, but two, they're using a measurement for years, but you got to think we have no gauge. Like, so how long is a Hylian year?
That's true. I mean, if you played the game, a Hylian day is what, an hour?
Well, that's like if we watch, like say you watch Game of Thrones, the scale there doesn't necessarily match up. It's like the same kind of thing, because it's like they have like their time. It's like their seasons could last. Like, their seasons last for decades.
Right, because it doesn't follow the same laws of physics that we're trying to imprint upon it.
You have to understand, this is not Earth.
Right.
This is a different land.
Correct.
According to George R. R. Martin, he made a comment about this a couple weeks ago, actually, about, like, for fans who are trying to figure out how the world of Westeros actually works, and he was like, "Don't try to figure out scientifically; it's magic."
Well, there's a theory floating around, because a lot of people bring up how there's timeline issues with the season that had just aired. So, a lot of stuff was happening too fast. Now, the theory I like is actually that while they're giving measurements, their scales are not the same. So everybody's about twice the height of, like, a real-life person. It's just everything in Westeros is bigger, but the scale of land is smaller.
Oh, I know this
So-
theory. I've heard about this one.
So their
That's
troop
interesting.
movements are able to move at double the speed because the people are relative to us. Because you don't have normal people side by side with them, you only have people from that universe.
Well, that's kind of like before we standardized time in this country with the railroad. Every town had its own time. Like it didn't matter what time zone you were in the country. You go down the street to the next town. The clock in that town could be 10 minutes earlier, 10 minutes after, but that's what time it was.
It's all based on sundials.
And all the business in that town ran based off of that time until the railroad was implemented, and they standardized time because of railroad schedules. Then all these times in all these towns were synchronized.
That's like if you're trying to explain something dealing with temperature, and it's like you're just saying degrees, and it's like, do you mean Fahrenheit or Celsius? It's
Maybe
the same
Calvin.
kind of thing.
Maybe it's Calvin.
It could be Kelvin, and that could put you off by hundreds. Like,
Yeah.
Talking about being off, let's talk about power levels there, Anthony. Let's talk about your second franchise.
I will say it
and
here
some
and
things
now.
that are off.
Power levels are bullshit. But a franchise that is near and dear to my heart is Dragon Ball. Not just Dragon Ball Z, not Super, which is new, but Dragon Ball as a whole. It's a beautiful
GT?
story. GT is not necessarily canon. I don't know.
No, it's not anymore.
But
from Retcon.
Well, that could go either way. I'm not sure what they're doing with that. But anyway, it's a beautiful story that starts with a little boy getting shot in the face by a girl. And it draws heavy influences from a lot of different sources. Mainly a lot of Journey to the West. A lot of Western media comes into influences there. So you see a lot of, like, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. You see Bram Stoker's Dracula. You see the Terminator. It's just all over the place. And then a lot of Japanese culture as well as Chinese culture fit into it. And
Right, like, the whole thing's based around the story of the Monkey King, right?
yeah, that's Journey to the West.
Okay.
And then you have your main character who actually was very much based on Astro Boy. That's where a lot of his look comes from, because Akira Toriyama, when he was making it, he was trying to actually just make the most basic shonen hero he could make. And it was just this little gag manga that picked up steam, and like it actually became like really popular. And oddly enough, like one of their characters that's kind of a joke was a big reason for the popularity of the show when it happened. It was actually Krillin was yeah, because it gave more personality, because Krillin in the original Dragon Ball, like he was the personality of the show.
Yeah, he was a dick, if I remember correctly.
Oh, he was, and he had all the character depth, and then it progressed through Dragon Ball, and you got to the point where you had King Piccolo, and that was your big bad. That's when it went from being a little gag manga to being like an actual like shonen anime with like a big bad. It was like good versus evil, although Goku's not really good. He's just kind of someone that wants a good fight.
You think they could have gone a little harder with figuring out names for all the characters? They're all named after vegetables.
Only the Saiyans are.
Well,
That's Akira Toriyama. He likes his pun names.
he does like his pun
He
names.
loves his pun names.
Mm-hmm.
But then that moves on into Dragon Ball Z, which, you know, like that's most of our exposure in America, because Dragon Ball Z came first. Here.
Absolutely,
Like
yeah.
Dragon Ball did not hit American shores, unless you had like the old VHSs until well after Dragon Ball Z,
Well-
and that opened up. It went from being a martial arts anime, you know, based on like Earth. It opened it up. It gave it a sci-fi twist and opened up the universe.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I remember just hearing about Dragon Ball Z from like one of my mom's friends. Like, oh, that's a cartoon that, you know, they actually kill the characters and stuff. Like, it was, I guess at the time, kind of a different type of cartoon that, unless you're like really into anime or stuff, you weren't. This was something that you didn't have to be an anime fan to know about, essentially.
That was one of the shows that brought anime into the mainstream. I mean, because there wasn't much anime on TV before that. I mean, you had Speed Racer way back when.
Yeah, and you had Astro Boy. And
Mobile Suit Gundam showed up, but it was
Gigantor.
not really that big in America.
Yeah.
But Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, they were around that time, and that's
And they
what
they ballooned
started
out.
the anime craze.
You know, and there were plenty of other ultra-violent animes and anime movies that were released before Dragon Ball and that were out at the same time. You know, Fist of the North Star is a prime example.
You're already dead.
Ninja Scroll, another one.
Ninja Scroll was great.
Ultra-violent though, you know, it was way heavy.
I'm pretty sure Akira was out by then too.
Akira came later because Dragon Ball started in, I believe, in the 70s?
I think it was
late
early
70s.
80s, right?
And
No,
Akira
yeah,
was the mid-80s.
No, original Dragon Ball was, I think that was in the 80s. But it came before Akira, but not by much. It was around the same time. And then, like Dragon Ball has, like, ballooned. Like, it's back into, like, relevance with, like, Dragon Ball Super coming out, which... You can love it, you can hate it. It's actually gotten pretty good. It started off really weak, and then it took off. Like, it took a very basic premise and ran with it, which, like Dragon Ball Z, it opened things up, but instead of opening it up to just space in the one universe, it opened up a whole Dragon Ball multiverse. I think the main issue with it is in Japan, Super airs on Sunday mornings, so it can't be quite as gritty and violent as Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z were, because they aired on Saturday nights, which is a completely different audience.
Right, your demographic is completely different at that time. Also, but then again, the Japanese censorship is, they censor the weirdest things and let other stuff just fly. It's just strange that you know, and that you're dealing with the sensibilities of a different culture.
That's a matter of different cultures, but you got to think like Sunday morning. It's like that's going to be more geared towards children. Like this is children of people that grew up with Dragon Ball. Because you got to think, like, everybody that grew up with, like, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, like, they actually have, like, young children. They're like, oh, I can sit and watch this thing that I loved when I was young with my kids.
Right, and even though there is death in Dragon Ball Z, I mean, but it's also like torture because I mean, you know, the old adage is how many Dragon Ball Z characters does it take to screw in a light bulb? One, but it takes them 47 episodes to do it.
The thing about that, though, is unlike most shows, like, a character can die. Most shows, it's your main characters are protected by plot armor. Now,
Well,
a Dragon Ball Z character, it's like, yeah, like, they can come back, but who knows when.
But it's almost like they're making up the rules as they go along. You know, like
Oh,
so the character dies, they're in the afterlife. You know, the whole arc in the beginning with King Kai.
That's
you
Akira
can bring him back,
Toriyama.
but you can only bring him back one time. You can't do it twice. But like, when did that rule come out?
That's Akira Toriyama.
When did you figure that out?
The way he writes is he's very much from the seat of your pants type of
Yeah,
author.
totally organic.
But the issue with that is he does run into continuity problems because he forgets.
But that's the challenge of any artist is problem solving. It's all problem solving, a series of problem solving. When you even in music, you know, you create tension and then you resolve that tension with tonic notes. You know, so. In the case of writing for Dragon Ball, he creates all this crazy stuff, and then he has so many balls up in the air at the same time. He's got to do 10 fluff episodes to juggle them. That's what it feels like to me.
There's only 7 balls.
You know, that's you know what I mean, though. He's got 7 balls up in the air. Okay.
Yeah, but it doesn't help though that his editors or anyone or all the higher ups start bothering him about his work because that was a big problem during the Android saga. They were like that's why we had during that whole thing during Dragon Ball Z with the constantly changing of these antagonists. First you had Dr. Gero and his fat android clown, and then you had 17, 18, 16, and then you get Cell. And all that's for progression, like his editors
yeah, that was a pretty tight transition of antagonists compared to their other story arcs in a relatively short period of time.
All because leading up to the point till Cell, his editors, the head honchos kept coming back saying these designs are boring. Because once you do something like Frieza with 4 transformations, these punk androids or these.
That's just too many transformations.
Luckily, Cell only had 3.
Yeah, all right.
Well, the editor issue is a part of why the transformations happen too, because they would just not like the look, and he's like, okay, well, and they're like, just make them transform. But part of that is also cost saving, time saving issues, because Akira Toriyama is a master of cutting corners, so he just made his people easier to draw. That's why Super Saiyan happened, because that was just an excuse to not have to ink Goku's hair every week.
That's a fun fact right there.
That is a fun fact.
Alright, so I'm going to ask a question of the panel. Who is your favorite Dragon Ball character?
Dragon, just in general?
Yep.
Like throughout... Oh, jeez, that's tough. Tien.
You're a Tien fan.
Tien is the stuff right there, man. He's a regular dude. He's got his third eye is open. And he holds his own. He ain't no Yamcha. That's for sure.
Fun fact, Tien actually has a very recent win under his belt in Dragon Ball Super.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, he takes out a sniper.
Nice.
And so I'm gonna go with mine, I guess, since I'm already talking. Now, it's kind of a tie between Vegeta and Piccolo.
Yeah, Piccolo's pretty cool.
I
don't know.
But there is one character that pulls ahead, and I have to say no.
No.
Mr. Satan. He is the true champ that we all need, and
he may not be the hero that. What is it?
The hero we.
What is?
He may not be the hero we deserve, but he's the hero we need.
Yeah, there you go.
And
Hail Satan!
As
Hail Satan!
as like when I was younger and I was watching this, I was like, oh, this guy is so dumb and it's so bad. But like as an adult, it's like I very much appreciate his character so much more. He's the best character.
Can
in the
I
show.
say that in the old Budokai game, Mr. Satan was the best because his special was literally handing the guy a present that was a bomb and
Yeah, present for
running off.
you, and just blowing it
Yeah,
up.
it was-
Well, it was reminiscent of Blazing Saddles.
That was
A candy ground from Mr. Mongo.
that was actually canon from the Boo arc.
yeah.
Like that actually does happen,
Yeah,
where he gives Boo a Game Boy and it explodes.
yeah.
So that is a canon move.
The real bitch was inventing the
Mr.
candy
Satan.
ground.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Favorite Dragon Ball character? That's tough because there's just so many good ones out there. You know, I'm gonna give it to the old man, Master Roshi. You know,
Yeah,
he is-
I thought you were gonna say Roshi.
you know,
And Roshi's a close second for me because nobody should be allowed to. Like, he's definitely a sex offender, right?
I mean,
But
I
he's
was
got
gonna.
his own island, you know, it's just him out there with the turtle. Like, who would leave children alone with him? I don't understand how he gets away with it.
Well, I don't know. You might want to ask the Ox King how he feels about that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, like, I could cop down and say like Vegeta or Goku, but like, everyone likes Goku or Vegeta. No one really likes Gohan. You know, he gets super strong, and then
I was a Saiyaman.
yeah, then that.
Then that happens.
I would much rather see more high school romance, fluffy vanilla shit than Sandman ever again.
Where Teen
Now-
Trunks and Gohan
No.
do a little. I'm making
No,
a gesture here.
with-
You folks can't see it at home, but
Gohan the
well,
Dell.
Now, Gohan actually was one of my favorites back when I was younger and I originally watched it. But especially with Dragon Ball Super, the reason Vegeta has come to the forefront for me is like he has the most character development of anybody in the series. Like he has like an actual character arc where he goes from being a true villain to eventually actually becoming a hero, and that's throughout the entirety of Dragon Ball Z. Like he doesn't become a good guy until the very end. Because I mean, in the Buu arc, even when he's like on their side, like he murders a whole lot of dudes. He murders literally an entire stadium full of people just to get Goku to fight him.
A quarter. Still.
That's a lot of people.
yeah, that is something they never really address. Is that he's accountable for a lot of death, a
in-
lot
in
of
the-
human death. They just kind of like brush it off, like,
the
oh, you
Android
can be
Saga?
part of the team now.
In the
No,
Android Saga,
motherfucker,
he
you-
kills more people than the androids in their timeline.
Yeah, it's a war crime.
He's an
Almost.
anti-hero.
Yeah.
He is...
Oh, he's an anti-hero. He's a genocidal maniac.
Yeah, he's an anti-hero.
No,
Like,
that's
he's,
not anti-hero.
No.
Anti-hero. Batman is an anti-hero.
Batman
He-
is not an anti-hero. Now Deadpool is an anti-hero.
Okay, Deadpool is an anti-hero. Vegeta is
He blew up an
Well,
entire
you
planet
gotta-
of moth
you gotta
people.
The
he blew up
scale...
an entire planet of moth people. Yeah,
that's
scale.
that's filler.
the scale.
right,
You know,
but
Joe
no.
Stalin said that 10 deaths is a tragedy, but 10,000 deaths is just a statistic. A statistic. A statistic.
Well, I mean, who's gonna stop him? You remember that bit before or in Dragon Ball Z? This is way long ago. It's before, like right before Trunks shows up. This is like after the Frieza arc, and Vegeta comes back to Earth, and it's just who's hanging out with Bulma? Yamcha, Krillin, and I think that's it. It's just him and Bulma, and all those three guys hanging out. Vegeta shows up. He's like, gotta come fucking use your shower. Fuck off.
Yeah,
And then they're like, well, no, who's gonna stop him? Who can stop Vegeta?
that's true. But just because you can't stop him doesn't mean you shouldn't hold them accountable.
Well, the only person who... Here's the real fucked up thing. Bulma's still married to him.
Yeah, she must like abusive men, right?
No, she must be very abusive.
Well, I don't know, given that her history, which leads me to my honorable mention. Who was the pig guy?
Oolong.
Oolong. Oolong dopest character. He was the first one to get a wish in Dragon Ball. What did he wish for?
Boneless panties.
But the honorable mention for best Dragon Ball villain has to be Monster Carrot. The dude had all the swag that you could wish for, and he could turn guys into carrots. How can you beat that?
That's true.
Horde. But we're about to come to a close, so I guess I will give my final franchise. It has Star in it, but it's not Star Wars. It's Star Trek. Why? Because I'm a Trekkie, first and foremost. Star Trek, just for me, I grew up with it more, while I did grow up with the original trilogy, because that's all that the Burson family seemed to want to watch.
We were Trekkies too. There was a lot of Next Generation in my house, as well as the original series with Shatner.
Voyager and Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine.
Woo!
Deep Space Nine. Yeah, all right.
I got some Deep Space Nine for you.
Captain Benjamin Sisko. Yeah.
I kind of like Deep Space Nine, but Voyager, that was a show only a mother could love.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Voyager.
Enterprise. What about with Scott Bakula?
Yeah, that's where I fell off. That's why I fell off. I'm not gonna lie. Like,
was he actually the captain of the Enterprise, or was the captain of the Enterprise somebody that he assumed the body of during one of the episodes of Quantum Leap?
Honestly, that would be a better show.
I thought that'd be so much better. That could use a reboot.
Quantum Leap.
That would be great.
And that ended like they fucking copped out.
Like they did that in Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They did a Quantum Leap.
Did they?
They did. The latest season, they did something with that. But Star Trek originated from Gene Roddenberry, the greater George Lucas.
Yep. All right.
Send all your hate tweets to Ben_Burson at Twitter, please.
Thanks.
You don't check your Twitter anymore.
No, I don't.
Let's see. The first TV show, the original series, went from 1966 to 1969. Then we had almost a 20-year break till Next Generation, which started in 87 to 94. Then we had Deep Space Nine, 93 to 99.
Good
which,
times.
if you remember the first Deep Space Nine, it was Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, talking to Benjamin Sisko.
Yep.
Talking shit.
My personal two favorite captains.
You got Patrick Stewart. That's like that's got to be every man's secret man crush, because just that voice.
Riker.
He could whisper sweet nothings into my ear all night.
Riker, once he grew out the beard,
he was the man.
He was the man.
That
was the
but
best
he got
beard in
reduced to
space.
Fun fact,
believe
actually.
it or not, poor guy.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
The beard only worked in the 80s, though.
Yeah. Well, fun fact, actually, the actor who played Riker wasn't really into the role. Like, he wasn't a big fan of sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a real challenge for him. So he doesn't like when people refer to him like, hey, number two. Number one.
Number one. He was
Number
number
one.
one.
Yeah, well, he seemed like a number two to me.
No.
Oh.
Send all your hatred.
Send all your hate mail to Bart.
_Burson on Twitter.
Then we had Voyager, 95 to 2001.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't realize that it overlapped with Deep Space Nine for
I
that
didn't
long.
think it went for that
Mainly
long.
because I was so focused on Deep Space
Now,
Nine.
I'm sensing like a pretty big gap in your timeline, where you're forgetting 6 movies
Oh no! I'm focusing on TV. I'll get
that
to the
happened
movies. Don't
over
worry.
this big gap.
Look,
Well, we're not
I
talking
will
about
get
those
to the
movies.
movies. There really wasn't a big gap. The only big gap was the Star Trek, the first one, but we won't touch those movies yet. But following Voyager, we have the aforementioned Scott Bakula Enterprise, which is 2001 to 2005. And now we have Discovery.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it's genius or foolish, but CBS is putting it on its own streaming network that you have to buy to actually see the show. So, unless you have you have to go into the dark web to get it. But it will be on Netflix internationally, not not in the States. So if you want
It's
to
going
check
to
it-
be geo-blocked
So get
on
yourself
Netflix.
a VPN,
Yeah.
and I can't tell you any more of this. Just use Google,
But
yeah,
figure it out.
Yep.
yeah.
just real quick on Discovery. Like I said, I am a Trekkie, but part of what kind of turns me off, because they have shown the Klingons, and
It was
the
a
Kling-
total redesign. I
it's-
saw that too.
Yeah, the Klingons are pretty much making Discovery like the rebooted movies, which I didn't really have a problem with the rebooted movies, except it was more like Star Wars, because J.J. Abrams is admittedly a Star Wars fan first, before Star Trek.
Well, I mean, the first movie was way too much lens flare.
Yeah.
But
That's what everyone said.
the casting was perfect.
Oh yeah, it was good casting
It was-
for all the...
I think everybody fits their role really well. Chris Pine is just dreamy and wonderful, and I think he makes an excellent Kirk. And I'd like to see him in more Star Trek movies reprising the role. I don't know how many more he's contracted for. I think he's only got one more left.
Yeah, I think they want to do one more, and Chris Hemsworth will be in it as his dad, so we're going to do some more timeline messer-uppers.
Will they do another Star Trek Generations before Bill
no.
Shatner kicks the bucket?
So my question for these reboot Star Treks: when is Sylar gonna cut the top off of Kirk's brain and get his powers?
No. This is why they rebooted it. But, if you want to talk movies, first movie was in 1979, Star Trek, the motion picture. Followed by, of course, everybody's... I've actually heard this online. They consider it the Citizen Kane of Star Trek movies, The Wrath of Khan,
It was okay.
1982.
It was alright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the best Star Trek movie. You're going to be getting into it shortly.
Then in 1994, following Khan, we got The Search for Spock.
That was a good one.
No.
I like
No,
the search.
I
for
have a feeling I know
the,
what he's
the
going to
Genesis.
do.
That was the one with the Genesis thing, or was that the?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one with the Genesis. But
Yeah.
the best Star Trek movie.
Voyage
And we
Home.
had The Voyage Home,
Yeah.
1986.
With the whale.
Yeah, that
Save
was.
the whales!
You know what the best part about that movie was? They're on Earth, right? And it's I guess the 70s or whatever. And he sits down at the CAD computer that's designing the plexiglass, and he picks up the mouse. He's like, "Oh, computer, hello, computer." You know, Scotty's talking into the mouse, and they're like, "It doesn't work that way."
No. The best part is they're in the 70s, and you have Chekhov walking around asking people for their nuclear vessels. Because we're very much in the height of the Cold War at that point. So those looks that he's getting on the street, like, those are real.
Now, you guys do know who directed that one, right?
Fill us in, Tom.
Shatner.
Of course.
He's actually
'Cause
not a bad
yeah.
director. He gets a great performance out of himself.
Yeah.
Because he believes in himself.
Yeah. Well, after The Voyage Home and The Whales, we get The Final Frontier in 1989.
That was the one with the where they met God, right? Or that was the Voyage Home.
No.
The Voyage Home was with the, what was it? It was like the cylinder that was like evaporating the oceans.
Yeah.
Oh, right. And then the Final Frontier is the one with the lady who comes onto the ship, and she's got like the jewel in her head, and there's like the like a lightning traveling around the ship. And
Fuck, I don't know.
it's kind of all blurry.
Yeah.
I don't
Because
remember
the
fifth
last one was Undiscovered Country.
Oh no, that's the one. It's
Yeah.
Undiscovered Country.
That's what I was
okay.
thinking of.
That's
that
the one I was
Undiscovered
thinking of.
Country in 1991. That was with the original class. Then we get the Generation movies, because Deep Space Nine sadly never got any movies.
Yeah, which
Voyager and Enterprise, and I'm sure Discovery do not deserve a movie.
no.
But Generations had 4 movies compared to the original, which had 6.
Yeah.
Generations had the first one in 1994.
Star Trek Generations was good.
Generations.
Yeah, that was good.
Then it had First Contact.
Also not
Oh,
bad.
it was okay.
96.
Yeah.
And we had Insurrection.
That was,
Which was not good.
Not that great. I mean, that was the Borg one. You know, it was okay.
Mhm.
You know, there were a lot of Easter eggs
It
from that
was-
movie that went through back to the television series, all the Borg episodes they did then, but they weren't. It wasn't done well enough.
But First Contact was also a Borg one, but it was
Yeah.
a good Borg one, and that's the problem there.
Mhm.
Like they tried to redo the same thing, and they didn't get the same success because it was.
Yeah.
No, because they
was
wanted
boring.
to
I
have a
can't even
female
really remember
lead,
it.
and like they wanted to make, which makes no sense because they gave her like a sexual interest in Picard,
I thought it was Data.
or no, yeah, Data, but she also had the interest in Picard.
She always had it for
I'm-
Picard because that was like
I mean,
after.
yeah,
He was,
how could you?
I'm
not?
sure Data has an interest in Picard as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Wouldn't we all?
yeah,
Mm.
he's pretty fit.
Just that voice.
Yeah, he's tight.
And of course, this ended with Star Trek Nemesis.
Yeah.
Uh,
That was the one with Clone Picard in it, right?
Yes, Clone Picard.
I don't even remember that one.
I don't think I ever saw it.
Yeah, I
I've
avoided
seen
that
it,
one.
and I
I think I've seen bits and
I
parts
seem
of
to
it.
have blocked it out, so it must have been terrible.
It's not good.
Yeah.
But I honestly, what I want to see from this franchise.
But all right, before you continue,
Oh,
because I knew this because we've talked about this person the entire time. Do you know who the clone of Picard was in that movie?
Like the actor who played him?
Yes,
No.
Tom Hardy.
Oh.
It was one of his first films that like mainstream was Tom Hardy. I knew it was.
So that's our
somebody.
homework for this week. Is we all have to go out and watch Star Trek Nemesis.
no,
and-
our homework for this week is to play 6 Degrees of Tom Hardy and connect him to every actor in Hollywood, which we probably could. He's in a lot these days.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Mm-hmm. But I grew up with the Star Trek franchise. The thing I liked about Star Trek was the journey. They were explorers first. This wasn't it wasn't a space war. It wasn't anything. These were just people exploring, and they got into different situations.
Except for Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine, they were stationary, but there's all these different cultures. Deep Space
Yeah.
Nine was like
It was a social hub.
yeah.
Like, that was
That was a melting pot of so many that you had.
It gave you such insight into the universe of Star Trek.
And you
And
got
what
old
it did
villains. You got old
And what it did is
the
that...
one that owned the bar.
Oh, yeah, the Ferengi.
Yeah.
Quark.
Quark. Yeah.
Quark. Yeah.
He was like a villain in Next Generation.
Yeah.
Well, he's you know...
He's a shyster. What are
Yeah.
you gonna do? Yeah.
Uh,
I really like the Ferengi. They kind of.
Yeah, Ferengi. They're you know, they're
I-
space schemers.
Now,
Yeah.
now to jump off that, I have my thoughts on this franchise, and honestly, I want to see it. Like rebooting it was probably not really like it's a good idea, but it wasn't really the way to go. What they need is something fresh and new. Give me a whole new perspective on the Star Trek universe. Like, give me a story from the Klingon point of view, or Romulans. Like,
Yeah.
don't,
Or
don't
do
put
a
me in a
story.
Federation
Do a
shoes.
story from someone during the Bajoran massacre, which was Deep Space Nine took place
Yeah,
just after that, and they were all refugees, and it was
Yeah.
like that would be so
give
poignant
me
now
give me
too.
the Star Trek version of the Diary of Anne Frank on the Bajoran massacre. Give me
Ooh,
give
yeah.
me the Last Samurai from like when the Klingons like first went to being like this technological
The
powerhouse.
Last Samurai,
Yeah, like-
starring Tom Cruise.
No. This day and age, it would be Tom Hardy. Obviously.
Oh man!
Obviously, it would be Tom Hardy.
Oh, Paul Mooney.
But no, I agree with that. The reboots, I believe the reboots were just to put interest back into Star Trek, because at that point, you know, Voyager, well, it had its fans and all that. I think it played too much with the Borg. Now, while I like the Borg as a villain, they became kind of the big villain for the franchise in Voyager, as opposed to, you know, Next Generation didn't really have a big villain. They were always going back and forth. Like, the Klingons were always, like, kind of villains, but with Next Generation, you actually have a Klingon on the ship so it became more diversified, and
Right, which is why I'm not upset about the redesign of the Klingons too, because in every iteration of the series, that race gets a little bit of a redesign. They get refined further and further. They change the style of the makeup a little bit. They change the garb a little bit. They change the weapons around a little bit, and so as the story evolves, as the series evolves, I think it's a natural evolution of the character to better capture the visualization that Roddenberry originally intended for the race to have.
Mhm.
So I don't see anything wrong with it per se. I think that they need to be careful with how they explain it,
yeah,
because not that I'm going to complain, but you're going to get a lot of angry nerds.
well,
See, in my opinion, when it comes to the series, I mean, there's a lot of big forces to be, they're main antagonist level. You have the Cardassians, ruthless. They torture
the
Picard.
Cardassians.
For,
What, Kim and Chloe?
Cardassians.
Kardashian, yeah, I know.
No, the Kardashians. They're obviously the antagonist. The
what's
Star
kind of
Trek
funny is if you look
universe
at them and then you look at pictures from the TV show, there's some similarities there.
needs. A lot less Spoon.
There's a lot less Spoon. Yeah.
Unless you watch certain videos, but we're not getting into that.
No.
Anyway.
But yeah, put them next to the Borg, and then what is it? The
Dominion, I believe, was in... It was the Dominion? Was that what they were called in Deep Space Nine?
Yes, the
If I
Dominion.
was yeah.
Yeah.
I see. That was probably my favorite because it wasn't. It was Deep Space Nine. Pretty much that whole station was in the middle of a war.
Right, they were right on the edge of a neutral zone next
Like
to a
that-
wormhole
that wormhole.
led to the battle.
And it was the whole battle between there where they were pretty much in the middle.
Right, so they're constantly taking on wounded soldiers from both sides.
Yeah.
They were a thoroughfare.
So the Next Generation, though, they also had their big bad, which was for them it was actually the Romulans. That was because they
it was.
very briefly introduced them during the original run, but
Yeah.
they became like this big like powerhouse. They were basically
And that's another race that they kind of redesigned. And in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, the main villain Nero is a Romulan.
Yeah.
And Romulans are basically just Vulcans that took a slightly different evolutionary path. And they're more emotional than they are logical.
Yeah.
You know what I think would be great for a Star Trek movie to reprise characters from Next Generation would be the Q Collective.
I see. I was going to talk about Q.
Q is where it's at.
The only thing, though, alright, unless you're into Star Trek, that's a tough one to... You could probably use that in TV. Movie, a little more difficult to...
It is, because it's a difficult character.
Q doesn't work as a villain because you can't beat him.
Well,
but you
you
can
have to
trick
convince him that
but
leaving you alone is in his best interest.
Yeah, and
or that
that's-
you're not worth his time.
The hard sell for that is it's not. While it's an interesting movie, it's not an exciting movie.
That's
like
true.
that would be
It's-
good,
it's,
but it wouldn't be exciting.
Yeah, I agree.
And the problem I have with the Borg is the Borg and the Federation. They're while there are two like forces that are against each other, they're literally the same thing.
Yeah.
The Federation
Yeah.
is like this perfect example of communism, and so is the Borg. It's just two different routes explaining the same thing. And that's the problem. It's like having a movie where it's the USA versus the alternate like USA. It's an entire movie or an entire series about that one episode from the original Star Trek where they meet up with their evil doppelgangers.
I disagree. Because on one hand, yeah, you've got peaceful, near perfect civilizations on both hands. One of them's a hive mind that destroys your individuality and doesn't let you love or feel or make art or fuck. The other one is the Federation, and they regulate all that stuff, but you're still allowed to do it to a certain
But
degree.
the Federation's also run by Starfleet. You are under their watchful eye, and they're run by admirals that are either corrupt and evil or incompetent.
That's true.
or in some cases, possessed by an alien worm monster.
Admiral Peach Fuzz. That's
or
Star Trek,
both
right?
evil and incompetent.
That's the worst
Wrong Way
one.
Peach Fuzz.
Yeah, but the Borg are also a little bit more on the scarier part. They just come in, they take you, simulate you. Don't even ask you if you want to. I much prefer vaporization over a simulation.
Well, it's basically just sci-fi zombie horror.
That's
literally what the Borg is, and it's like that's interesting, but it's still like, after a while, it's not exciting. It's like watching The Walking Dead and having them not run into people. It's like having them only fight walkers, and that's boring.
Current perspective is interesting because we are very desensitized to that whole genre.
We are almost Borg-like ourselves.
I know, and we're moving in that direction as a culture, which is interesting as well.
Be quiet, the Google Hive Mind can hear you.
I know. Well, sorry, we're all right.
We're sorry, Google. We promise.
We live in rural upstate, New York, so I wouldn't worry about that.
I'm sorry, Google. We didn't mean it. We promise.
It's all right. Well, guys, I think we're going to bring this episode to a close. I think we had fun talking about some of our franchises, some of our likes, some of our dislikes, what we're hoping for, what we are not hoping for.
Snakes on a Plane 2. 3? They made a sequel, right?
No.
They didn't?
No.
Oh, thank God!
But they
Woo!
will now.
I can sleep tonight!
Hey, from what I heard, there's actually a standing ovation in that movie for when Sammy J actually gave the line, because that's the only reason that you would go to see that movie.
Yeah,
It's the only reason anyone went to go see that movie, I think.
But anyway, guys, this is the Loser Report. And where can the people find and contact you if they wish to?
Contact me and follow me at Smanja85, SMANJA 85 on Twitter. Or no, just that. I'm fine with just that. Okay.
Bart, where can the people find and contact you?
They can email me at bartman1317 at gmail.com. You can see some of my work I've done video-wise on YouTube as Ganon1317. Good night.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin, can the people contact you in any way, or are you on lockdown?
You need to get an old priest and a young priest. And then you need a turtle, a duck, and a chicken. You put the turtle inside the duck, and then you put that inside the chicken. Then you take the old priest, and you have him put that inside the young priest. Videotape it, and put it on YouTube. And when you get 1,000 followers for your video, a magical window will appear, and you can speak into the window, and I will hear you.
We'll eventually get him set up.
That's
And
gross.
and I'm Tommy
I
Tom.
didn't say it was efficient.
You can find me at the TommyTom88 on Twitter, and please hit up the Twitter of the Loser Report at a Loser Report. Thank you, and as always, remember to throw those L's up.